Great. I think we'll get started. Hi, everybody. I hope you can all hear me. My name's Sarah Robbins. I'm the marketing manager at SALSA. I'm joined by my colleagues, Jackie Slatter, the development manager here at SALSA, and also Debbie Sullivan, who's going to be your host for the next half an hour. Thank you for joining us today. I should just point out, even though I believe Zoom will have done that already, but this session will be recorded and posted on the SALSA YouTube channel. However, we will be switching the recording off for the Q&A session that will happen at the end of the main presentation. Should you have any questions during the presentation, please could you pop them in the chat and we will make sure that they get answered during the Q&A session with Debbie and Jackie. So as I mentioned before, we are lucky enough to be joined today by Debbie Sullivan. She has been a SALSA auditor, mentor and trainer for 6 years. So she has got a lot of experience with SALSA businesses, and I'm sure she's going to give you some of her insights today. As it says on the screen, we're looking at effective supplier approval today and how that works with the SALSA requirement. So I hope that it's a really useful session. And without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Debbie.
Thanks, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's well today. So welcome to the effective supplier approval for small food and drink businesses. I'm going to run through this with you today. So hopefully give you a bit of a sort of enlightenment of what's expected from the SALSA standard, and obviously have those questions at the end if you need to ask any. So yeah, as Sarah said, I'm Debbie Sullivan. I have been a SALSA auditor, a mentor and trainer for about 6 years now, or just over 6 years. I've been in the food industry for 27 years, which is quite scary. But throughout that time, I have worked with companies to help them get to standards. So supplier approval is a big part of that, obviously. So hopefully I can sort of guide you through the requirements today. So just a little overview of today's topics. So why we need a supplier approval system, why it's so important, who needs to be approved. So thinking about, is it just ingredients or are there more people that we need to approve there as well? What are the options for supplier approval? So I find for smaller businesses, this is where some companies struggle when I do the audits. You know, what does good look like for a smaller business? Common questions that get asked when I go to do audits, so we'll cover that. Then we'll talk about a risk assessment. So, you know, we need to look at risk of suppliers and determine what risk they are. So we'll talk about, you know, what does that look like? Because again, some companies that I've audited have sort of not known how to structure that. So we'll give you a bit of a sort of guidance on that as well. We will touch a little bit on food fraud, then making claims. So what does that mean for you and the expectations of your suppliers? Then thinking about intake, touching on specifications, then any exceptions we've got, and then the ongoing management of these suppliers as well. So we haven't got lots of time, so we're fitting all this in, but as Sarah said, if you've got any specific questions that you'd like to ask, then please do. So why do we need a supplier approval system? Well, ultimately, we need to sort of ensure that our food is safe and it is of the nature and the standard expected by consumers and also people that we supply to. So the main umbrella of legislation is this Food Safety Act 1990. So I'm not going to sort of go into the depths of legislation, but it's just about understanding that this is why we need it. We need to sort of show that we've got a system in place, that we are not only purchasing those ingredients that are safe, legal, authentic, but also that, you know, we are continuing that through our end product as well. So this Food Safety Act just touches on, you know, we as a business need to ensure that we sell food of the nature, substance or quality which consumers expect. So, you know, this is why we need it. This is our legal obligation. And I think when we talk about supplier approval, we've got to think about the ingredients that we're buying first. So do you understand your ingredients? I think for me, again, this is what I find with some companies is that, you know, they don't understand the hazards associated with their ingredients. They don't understand the risks there. And I think this is where we sort of, as businesses, just need to think, what are our ingredients? What are the hazards that could be associated with our ingredients? And then if we understand that, then we can effectively assure that our suppliers are right as well for us. So just some examples that, you know, things have happened with ingredients. So this could be that it's fraud, it could be micro issues, it could be allergen issues. And these photographs on here just sort of show these things that have maybe happened in the past where, you know, it was the supply of the ingredients which had caused these issues for companies. So the first one was the Sudan one. And this was a massive recall. And this was where contaminated red chili powder got into the supply chain. So fraudulent activities. Then I'm sure that you've all heard recently with the sandwiches and then the lettuce is implicated in this. So again, you know, knowing our ingredients, knowing the risks, but also understanding that as producers and manufacturers and supply of these products that, you know, it could be us. Some of the retailers have been, you know, had civil cases carried out on them, so put towards them because, you know, they've got an obligation there to have that safe food. And then just the final one, so Pret a Manger, they had a obviously a vegan wrap which they sold, and again the supplier of one of those ingredients hadn't highlighted that may contain issue of dairy. So unfortunately a lady actually consumed that thinking it was dairy free and unfortunately passed away. So it's really sort of understanding our ingredients, what the hazards are, and then being able to sort of say, what can we do to make sure these things, you know, don't happen to us, and ensure that we cover these sort of things within our risk assessments. So just touching on who needs to be approved. So obviously ingredient suppliers, so I'm sure you all know that ingredient suppliers need to be approved, but also our packaging suppliers. So again, you know, we have risks that may come in with our packaging. So that could be that they're not suitable for food, or they're not suitable for our food product as well. That's a consideration we need to think about. Is it food safe, but also is it suitable for our specific type of product? Suppliers of any processing aids that you have. So again, anything that sort of comes into contact with our food, we need to ensure that we've got a approval system. So that could be even lubricants that engineers use. So ensuring that, you know, we understand that there may be allergen risks with those as well. Agent and brokers, so anyone who's dealing with, you know, that middle person for supplying those ingredients to you, ensuring they have the right systems in place just to protect ourselves again. Any subcontractors, so if you have co-packers or distribution, people who contract your distribution, then we should have an approval system in their place for them. And consultants, so I always say this, you know, I am a consultant, but you've got to have the right consultant for your business. There's lots of different consultants out there, but are they right for you? Do they understand your industry, your products? I've worked with companies in the past who have had previous consultants who have not highlighted hazards within their system or helped the company highlight hazards in their system because they didn't have the experience and knowledge of that industry. So even though it's not a specific requirement at the moment in SALSA, it's definitely something that you should be considering. You know, who is it that's offering you support? And obviously, if it's a SALSA auditor, a mentor, then you know, we can sort of ensure that they are there to sort of support you and they're right for you as well and understand the standard. So just some options for supplier approval. This is one of the questions that I sort of get asked a lot when I do audits. What do we need to do? What do we need to do as a smaller company to approve our suppliers? Well, it's for any size business, really. It's about having the confidence in your suppliers that they are going to supply you with that safe, good quality, authentic, legal product. That's the key thing. And how do we do that? So there's different ways. So this could be just one of these. It could be, you know, 2 options to do this as well. So it could be that we start with that supplier assessment questionnaire. So the SAQ, so you'll know that technical, we always abbreviate things. But if anyone asks about an SAQ, it's a supplier assessment questionnaire. So this is where we usually start with when we get new suppliers on board. And we ask these questions of, do you have certification? And then if they don't, it's really key to then think, well, if they haven't got certification, does your questionnaire cover things that you will need to know about that supplier that are key for you and that ingredient that is being supplied? So that could be about security at site. It could be about how they handle their ingredients or their processes for things like fraud. So it's really sort of thinking that if a site doesn't have that third-party certification, does your supplier assessment questionnaire, does that ask the right questions? So it's got to be right. Okay. So, you know, I see a variety of different supplier questionnaires when I go to sites, but I always say to the same thing. This is about you asking that supplier those questions that is going to help you determine whether, you know, you can put the trust in them. Because I think that's the thing as well with supplier approval. We can have all our robust systems in place, but we've got a lot of trust in our suppliers and we put a lot of trust in, but we've got to put these measures in place just to make sure that these suppliers are going to be on the same sort of, vision as us of providing that safe, legal, authentic product. So some sites that obviously will just work that if they've got their suppliers as with third-party certification, then that would be their approval. But again, you know, for you as manufacturers or within your businesses, then you need to think about what third-party certification is acceptable. What is a third-party certification that is going to give you that safe, that assurance that they are producing in a safe and legal manner. So this could be things like SALSA standard or one of our GFSI, so the Global Food Safety Initiative, so like our BRCGS, or a standard like this. So for yourselves, just be sure of, you know, what is acceptable and what is maybe, you know, acceptable as a food safety standard that they've got. And it's not just a quality standard, which may not look at things like HACCP and things like that. In some cases, we may decide to audit a company. So this may be based on risk. It may be in, we react to things that happen with audits. It may be that you schedule audits in. So we don't say that you need to audit, but it's about you determining if something does happen, would that be an option for you to ensure that supply from that supplier? And part of it, especially with smaller businesses, we do see that reputation. So you've worked with the company a long time, which can also sort of add value to that supplier approval system. But again, it's just about making sure we're asking the right questions, because this should all be outlined in a procedure where you're saying, you know, this is what our sort of procedure is for supplier approval. So you can show an auditor, you know, this is how we approve suppliers, and this is what we'll accept from them. And we'll talk a little bit more about risk assessment in a second. So these are your options. So the key thing is for you to set them out and be really clear. You know, what is it? What do they need to have to be able to be an approved supplier? So we'll just talk about carrying out a risk assessment. A risk assessment, I think sometimes for companies that I've been to, if I ask them for their risk assessments, they'll look at me sort of, what? I don't know what a risk assessment is. So obviously we do risk assessments with HACCP, and that's not all companies. Obviously with, you know, some companies have very effective risk assessments in place, but some just don't know how to sort of structure it or format it. So we'll just talk about the sort of SALSA guidance here. So there are 4 considerations when carrying out a risk assessment. So this is, again, you know, highlighted by SALSA, that to determine the risk, then we need to take these 4 things into consideration. And there may be other things that you decide to sort of add on there, but these are the sorts of things that we need to consider. So starting with, we talked about raw materials before. So the type of raw materials. What are the consideration of the hazards? Is it a high risk product or is it a low risk product? Is there micro concerns? Are there fraudulent activity concerns? We could even include origin within there as well. So that consideration, where is it coming from? Because obviously the further it comes from, then the greater risk it could be. Or it could be that we get from a country where we know there is a higher risk with fraud. What third-party certification they have. So just as I touched on before, you know, what is that sort of food safety standard that they're working to? And again, we will allocate sort of risk scoring to this. So if they've got no third-party certification, then obviously we may consider that that's more of a risk than if they do. Okay. Then the frequency of supply. So obviously, if it's a frequent supplier, then that may increase the risk to your business. So if you get that supply in lots, so again, that may be a consideration. And then we can sort of think about supplier issues and performance. So if you're getting a lot of non-conformances with a supplier and the ingredients that they're delivering, then that may increase obviously the risk of that supply. So this is all set out in tools and tips on the SALSA website under 1.6.1. And you can find the risk assessment categories of scoring there. So you can sort of look at those and put your own risk assessment together. And I've just got a little visual for you. So this is the output of that risk assessment. So these are scored, obviously, in sections. And then we can sort of determine whether those suppliers are a low, medium or high risk. Now, based on whether they are low, medium and high risk, then that will determine what sort of approval they will need. So do they need an SAQ or do they need certification? You know, all these sorts of things. So you wouldn't have a high risk supplier and then maybe sort of just rely on that SAQ, or you may decide to do an audit because it's a high risk. So again, you know, thinking about going back to what we're trying to achieve here, we're trying to make sure that we're getting that safe, legal, authentic product. So how do we do that, and how do we get, not guarantee, but how do we reduce the risk of some of these things maybe happening to us? How can we protect ourselves? So this is just an example of a SALSA risk assessment, but there are other risk assessments there that you can sort of look at, which may include touch on fraud and other sort of subjects there. But this is, a good basis for that risk assessment. And the output of this is that supplier approval list. So for your SALSA audit, you need to sort of have this to show that you have gone through some structured way of deciding if someone is approved or not approved. So somewhere on this column, on the previous slide, you need to say, yes, these are approved, and how that they've been approved as well. But you'll have this supplier approval list there, which is the output of sort of that risk assessment. So you can show that who your supplier is, what they supply, and what that overall risk assessment came out as. So as I say, low, medium, and if you decide to go with a high risk supplier, and that's based on those different factors anyway. So this supplier approval list, if we have got certificates there, then obviously, having a document like this, you can write in the expiry of the certificates and just make sure that you're reviewing that supplier on an annual basis to ensure that certificate is in place. And then any comments that you need to put in there as well. So we'll just touch a little bit on food fraud. We have got another webinar on our SALSA website on YouTube. So if you want to have a look at that as separate, then it goes into a bit more detail, but we'll just touch on it for today because it does sort of fit obviously with supplier approval. So food fraud. So food fraud is that intentional substitution, addition, or removal of a material to increase the perceived value of the material. So this is basically someone, supplying you with something which is either not of the nature that you think it is. It may be adulterated, it may be substituted, it may not be from where you thought it was going to be. So we need to make sure that our suppliers are obviously go through that supplier approval system to ensure that we're working with those reputable suppliers. We understand where these ingredients are coming from, and we understand what ingredients may be subject to this fraud as well. So and understanding even with document fraud. So our suppliers need to ensure that the documents they give us are also fully legible and clear and are of the correct sort of specification that we're expecting. So food fraud is on the increase. We hear a lot of sort of things going on in the industry with different ingredients. I remember one professor had said that basically there were not many ingredients or food products that he hadn't heard of that had actually been subject to fraud. If people can make money, sometimes they can, they will. So again, it's just understanding those risks of your ingredients. Do you have ingredients that we know are, the higher risk products, things like our honey, spices, herbs? Do you understand those sort of threats to those ingredients? And also making sure that we understand those, but we have these measures in place that when we approve our suppliers, that they can sort of prove that they are of the nature that we're expecting them to be in. So you can even incorporate your risk assessment into your supplier approval risk assessment, or we can have a separate risk assessment. That's entirely up to you. But as I say, if you look at the food fraud webinar, SALSA, then that will go into a bit more detail, and that's clause 1.64 if you need to look a bit more into that. Then claims. So if we think about what a claim is, then obviously claims can be to do with provenance, nutrition, health claims, free from. So this goes back to supplier approval again, because we need to make sure that if we are saying that it's from a specific region, or, you know, we're saying we use cheddar cheese, then we need to make sure that that's what our supplier is supplying us, but also, you know, how do we sort of verify that? Then we need to think about specifications. You know, is it actually cheddar cheese? How do we prove that? So we can make sure that, you know, we can then follow on that claim with our product. So really think about your claims. And if it's a claim that comes from the supplier, then, you know, we need to be able to demonstrate that we can validate that claim, basically. So we've talked a little bit about our risk assessment, how we approve our suppliers, making sure that they're supplying these ingredients. But then once they come onto site, you know, how do we then check that these are the right ingredients that we're asking for? Because, you know, we're just relying on those suppliers to supply these ingredients. And, you know, based on that information that we've done through our supplier risk assessment. So intake really is your first line of defense. So it's really key that the people who are taking these ingredients in understand what they're receiving. So have that approved supplier list at intake. So that's really key. So, and make sure that's up to date, obviously. So, you know, it ties in with what you've got. Check your incoming goods. So that doesn't mean that you need to check every single ingredient. It just means that you may do a visual check on the box. Is it labeled as it should? Has it been over labeled? Are there any concerns? But your people at intake know what they're looking for. It may be that we've asked our supplier for that added sort of assurance for our ingredients. So certain ingredients we may say, or all ingredients for a certificate of conformance, but for then maybe microbiological sensitive ingredients, we ask for a C of A or chemical or allergen or whatever hazards we've got in there. So C of A is a certificate of analysis. So if we're asking for those, what are your intake people looking for? So does it match the specification? If we're talking about a certificate of analysis, is it meeting those sort of requirements? And obviously they need to be traceable. And if there's an allergen status, it's known as well. So again, you know, when I go to do audits, this is one thing that sometimes people don't sort of follow through with that information. So it just helps your goods in people, and they understand that, you know, they are getting that, and it's important that that's from the supplier that you're expecting it from as well. Testing. Again, we're not here to tell you whether to test or not, but this could all be down to risk. So whether you decide to test your products or sample your products is all about maybe if there's an increased risk with something to do with one of your ingredients. So we've seen that with sort of the horse meat scandal. I've seen it with spices where there's been risks there as well. So that's important for you to just keep up to date with what's going on within the food industry. So as I said, with certificate of analysis, you know, check it against your specifications. Specifications are key with supplier approval. I had a company that had got a lot of complaints to do with stalks. And when I said, well, what's the specification from the supplier? And they said, well, I don't know what you mean. And I said, well, it will say how many stalks are permitted with these sultanas. And then they said, oh, I didn't even think to look at that. So again, going back to the beginning, do you understand your ingredients? What hazards could be there? Get your specification, understand what those hazards may mean and make sure that that specification meets your requirements. So as I said before, checking for micro criteria on their specifications, checking for foreign body type risks. So as I say, stalks, stones, what's permitted with that ingredient, because that's going to end up in your product if it is permitted at a certain level. But also allergen may contain. Do you need to then carry that on through your labeling? So all these things are really important because that's your agreement with your supplier. That's what they're saying they're sending to you. So it's really, really important. And make sure as well that then that is followed through your process. So consider it in your HACCP. So this data is really, really important for you to help ensure that you're supplying that safe legal product as well. So it really helps you with that level of risk. And as I touched on before, that certificate of analysis, make sure the people at intake understand what that certificate analysis means. Does it meet that specification? Do you have that on positive release? Then just to touch on exceptions. So if you do have exceptions, then obviously an exception is where if you have a supplier that can't maybe supply to you and you need an emergency supplier, maybe, you know, you can't approve them maybe they're not approved, but you still need to put that approval system in place for emergency supply. So again, write this into your procedure. What do you do if you can't get an ingredient off one of your approved suppliers? Do you have an exceptions process in place? Because this is where things go wrong with businesses, because they have to go and react. And this is where things go wrong. So have a clear process in place. What do you do if you need to get that ingredient off someone else? I was working with a really big company, you know, recently, and even sort of talking about these things is, well, what do you do with a sort of allergen point of view? Because there could be may contain with that emergency supply. And they said, oh yeah, you know, we need to write it in. So it's just making sure that we're thinking of all these things so we don't sort of end up in a situation that we don't want to be in. So once we've got these approved suppliers, then it's just about the management, building good relationships with them, understanding, you know, what's happening in the industry, carrying out our horizon scanning. So horizon scanning is just looking at data around fraud, and the FSA website is really useful for businesses as well. So just make sure, you know, you're keeping in touch with what's happening and you're reviewing these suppliers annually and ensuring that the certificate is still being met and adhered to. So you can have a look at this, and I'm sure when you get audited, if you've been audited, these are the requirements of SALSA. So yeah, having that procedure in place, really outline, you know, what it covers, ingredients, packaging, what your approval system is, your approved supplier list must consider the risks and also be available for the key staff as well. And then obviously those specifications need to obviously set that sort of standard. What is it that you're getting? What is this ingredient? What is that agreement with your supplier? Then, as I say, that procedure, that documented risk assessment, and obviously, you know, this includes ingredients like water supply as well. So making sure that's not a contamination issue. So just some common failings that we see when we do audit. So suppliers, SALSA companies not understanding the hazards and the threats of your ingredients. So again, you know, getting that sort of data around that, presuming controls are in place at your supplier. So it's nice to have sort of trust there, but again, you know, it may be that that SAQ just needs to challenge that. Having that robust risk assessment, what am I trying to achieve with this? Suppliers being missed off that list, so ensure you keep that up to date. review your suppliers, and react to any red flags. So if you're starting to notice a decrease in quality with your ingredients or any issues or arising complaints, then we take action and ensure it's in our HACCP plan as well. So just some non-conformances that we've seen in the past or actions from SALSA auditors. So again, making sure your practices follow that procedure, supplier list is up to date, you've got a robust goods in procedure as well, and making sure that even supplier of ingredients, if you go to wholesale or you go to retail, you still need to ensure that they are reputable and you've got a system in place there as well. So just some top tips. So make sure that supplier is reputable, make sure staff responsible for their purchasing, so buying, understand those risks as well. Make sure that your goods in staff have got that approved suppliers list and they understand the importance of inspecting those ingredients that are coming in. Keep up to date, as I said before, with that sort of what's happening in the industry and your suppliers, and make sure that your supplier certificates that they send to you are for the site that they are actually supplying from as well. And obviously that they're registered with the local authority. So think about if you need C of A's or C of C's, what sort of assurance can that give you? The C of A's are obviously good if you're buying things like pasteurized egg in. That will show you the testing that has been carried out. Keep all this up to date. Make sure that you've covered things like hauliers, contract packers within your supplier approval system as well. And the key tip, use SALSA tools and tips as well, because they're really useful. And even I refer to them a lot there to help me too. So thanks for joining us today.